You ever notice how the biggest systems in the world don't arrive with a bang? They quietly become unavoidable. No announcement, no clear starting point, just a slow shift. And then one day, it's already embedded in everything. Because what we're looking at here didn't begin as a company story. It began as an idea that was considered too much, even for government. Early 2000s. The pitch was simple, in theory, and extreme in practice. Gather everything: financial records, travel logs, medical history, communications, and build a complete picture of individuals so behaviour could be anticipated before it even happens. That program had a name: Total Information Awareness. It triggered immediate backlash. Civil liberty groups called it out as the foundation of something far beyond targeted surveillance. Congress stepped in and shut it down. Publicly, that's where it ends. But behind the scenes, the concept didn't disappear, it adapted. Instead of existing inside government, it was pushed outward, into private hands, into structures that operate differently, where the same restrictions don't apply in quite the same way. That transition is documented, and right in that window, a company appears that fits the shape of what was just removed. Palantir. Now this is where people tend to misunderstand what this actually is. It's not just data software. That's the polite description. What it actually does is far more specific. It connects things that normally don't sit together. Names to movements, transactions to relationships, events to patterns. It builds context at scale. And once that context exists, something subtle but powerful starts to happen. Classifications emerge. You don't just have data anymore, you have meaning assigned to that data. This person becomes high risk. That location becomes sensitive. Those connections become relevant. But those labels don't exist naturally, they're created. And whoever builds the system defines how those labels are formed. That's not a technical detail, that's influence. Because once decisions start being guided by those classifications, you are no longer just observing reality, you're shaping how it is interpreted. Now take that capability and place it inside intelligence agencies, then law enforcement, then financial regulators, then immigration systems, then healthcare, and then, to round it off, military operations. That's not scope creep by accident, that is expansion by design. There's documented evidence of early integration with intelligence communities where analysts could query multiple classified databases through a single interface, essentially removing the friction between separate and information silos. Sounds efficient, and it is. But efficiency has a side effect. It lowers the barrier to doing more. Because when everything is connected, the question stops being, can we access this? And becomes, why wouldn't we? Because once access is normalised, use follows. There's a case in New Orleans that rarely gets talked about properly. For years, a predictive policing system operated quietly, not publicly debated, not openly disclosed, using data like arrest records, social media and location patterns to generate risk assessments. Not convictions, not proven behaviour, risk. And when internal analysis was done, it showed disproportionate flagging patterns across communities. Now, whether you frame that as bias in the data, bias in the system, or bias in the outcome, the result is the same. Attention gets directed. And where attention goes, action follows. Because policing isn't just about reacting, it's about where resources are placed. And if a system is guiding that placement, it's indirectly shaping outcomes before anything even happens. That's one city. Scale it up. Immigration enforcement systems begin integrating multiple layers of information, biometric databases, financial activity, social networks, location tracking. Not just individuals, entire relational webs. At that point, you're not looking at isolated cases, you're looking at a network view of people's lives. And networks behave differently. They reveal patterns, you wouldn't normally see. But then they also create assumptions you wouldn't normally make. Because once someone is connected to something, even loosely, the system doesn't always distinguish between proximity and intent. And that's where things get a little bit messy. Now add another layer: financial systems. Integrations with treasury level data means access to transaction patterns, suspicious activity reports, movements of money across accounts. You'd start to see behaviour mapped not just socially but economically. And again, not after the fact, in real time. Which brings up an uncomfortable thought. If every aspect of someone's life can be mapped, movement, communication, finances, relationships, at what point does prediction start to replace investigation? Because those two things are very different. Investigation looks backward, prediction looks forward. And forward-looking systems don't need certainty, they work on probability. Which means decisions can start being made based on likelihood, not proof. And now here's where things accelerate. COVID. Perfect conditions for rapid deployment. Emergency powers, urgency, public fear, demand for solutions. Systems get rolled out quickly. Hospital data, prescription tracking, mobility patterns, behavioural indicators, all integrated into platforms designed to provide real-time insights. On paper, it's about managing a crisis. In practice, it normalises large-scale data integration across entire populations. And once that infrastructure is in place, it doesn't get dismantled. Because dismantling something that works, especially something expensive, isn't usually how these things go. It gets repurposed, adjusted, expanded. You start with infection tracking. You move into resource location, and then behavioural analysis. The broader public health monitoring. Different label, same capacity. Now layer in military applications. Project Maven. Applying artificial intelligence to video feeds, identifying objects, analysing behaviour, flagging potential targets. Real-time interpretation. The system doesn't just present data, it processes it. It prioritises, it suggests. And over time, alliance builds. Because if a system can process more data faster and highlight what matters, people start trusting it. And once trust is established, dependence follows. Now imagine trying to remove that system. You've got years of data stored in proprietary formats, workflows built around its structure, teams trained to use it daily. Switching away isn't just a software update, it's rebuilding an entire operational model from scratch. There is a documented case where an agency attempted exactly that. The cost estimates ran into tens of millions. The timeline stretched out, data extraction proved difficult. Eventually they stayed, not necessarily because they preferred it, but because leaving wasn't realistic. That's not an adoption, that's lock-in. And lock-in changes incentives, because once a system becomes essential, questioning it becomes harder, replacing it becomes unlikely, and expanding it becomes convenient. Now zoom out beyond one country. Across Europe, similar systems have introduced policing, intelligence, healthcare, often through security or crisis entry points, and then gradually extending into civilian domains. In Germany, legal challenges reached constitutional courts. The ruling pushed back on aspects of predictive policing, stating that automated analysis of personal data, that scale, interferes with fundamental rights. But even there, the technology doesn't vanish entirely, it gets reshaped, redirected, continued in other forms. In Denmark, academic studies looked at predictive systems and found statistical disparities. Certain groups flagged at higher rates, even when controlling the variables. Again, interpretation matters. Is it the data, the model, the design? Pick your angle, but the pattern keeps appearing. In the Netherlands, documents revealed extensive integration across police and intelligence systems, multiple data sources feeding into a central platform with real-time analysis across border information sharing. And here's where it gets interesting. A lot of this wasn't widely known until a Freedom of Information request forced details into the open. meaning that these systems weren't always introduced through public debate, they were uncovered after deployment. That's a very different process, because once something is already operational, the conversation shifts from should this exist to what do we do about it now? And those, again, are not the same question. Now add another dimension, influence. Not in a vague sense, in a documented, trackable sense. Movement of personnel between company roles and government positions. Dozens of cases. People helping build systems, then moving into roles where those systems are produced, managed or expanded. Or the reverse, individuals from government stepping into the company, bringing insight, connections and understanding of internal processes. It's not illegal, it's not hidden, it's just structural, and structures shape outcomes. Then there's the lobbying, increasing expenditure over time, targeting specific policy areas. Defence, intelligence, immigration, healthcare, financial regulation. Each one aligning with where the technology is being deployed. Again, not unusual on its own, but combined with everything else, it builds a picture. Technology embedded across systems, personnel moving between roles, policy involving alongside capacity. At that point, it stops being separate elements, it becomes an ecosystem. And ecosystems don't require a central announcement to function, they just operate. Which brings me back to the core issue. When systems can integrate vast amounts of data, when they can categorise and prioritise behaviour, when they can influence how decisions are made, and when they become difficult to remove, you're no longer just dealing with tools, you're dealing with infrastructure. And infrastructure has a different kind of power. It doesn't need to command anything directly. It shapes what's possible. It defines the options that appear on the table. And it frames what gets noticed and what gets ignored, quietly, consistently, and at scale. And the question that sits underneath all of this isn't whether the technology works. It clearly does. The question is who decides how it's used, how far it goes, and where it stops. Because once something becomes embedded deeply enough, stopping stops being a simple decision. And if that decision isn't clear, or if it's not being made openly, then the system keeps expanding by default. Not through one big move, through 1,000 of small ones. Until one day, you're not asking when it started, you're asking how far has it already gone. And if you've made it this far, thank you very much. And of course, let me know what you think in the comments below, because it's quite a big subject and I'd like your thoughts on it. Till next time, look after yourselves and I shall see you in the next video.